Welcome to the Tricord Advisors podcast, where we answer life's hard questions to help you make smart decisions with your money. I'm Jeremiah Lee, and this is Randy Barkley. We're both certified financial planners. I'm also a California licensed attorney. All right, today we are talking about something that is a little harder, but we're going to try and breathe some life into it.
Yes.
So the question is, are you lonely? Are you a surviving spouse? We have dealt with so many folks currently and in the past that they are the surviving spouse in a relationship. Whether it's a young death or an older death, but their surviving spouse is someone that is a widow or a widower, and they're now living a life that they didn't expect.
Yeah, and anybody who finds themselves alone, where they were dependent upon somebody else to help them with their financial life and to take care of all that mundane aspects, all of a sudden they're alone.
Yeah.
And what do they do? And because our practice is, I have clients that I've had now for over 30 years, and I have seen transitions amongst my clients.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously death is one of those. Divorce has occurred also, but people all of a sudden are alone.
Yeah.
And they feel vulnerable, and they feel afraid, of what the future holds for them. So,
yeah. And the life to kind of bring into this is, what we do. I would say that this is one of the most rewarding and value-added moments is when one spouse passes away and the surviving spouse, they feel overwhelmed, they feel worried and anxious, they feel inexperienced, they don't know what to do next. They're dealing with emotional loss, but they're also looking at their own finances and just, it's hard. But we can walk in and say, you're going to be okay, let's get through this. And then we get to work. And I think that to me is so satisfying to take someone who feels all those hard emotions and turning those into peace, security, feeling resourced, feeling they have an ability that they didn't know they had before. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're talking today is someone who is a surviving spouse. And in that moment, it will just start at the very moment. Say there's a death and the surviving spouse comes in, and we've dealt with this many times, and whether young or older, and where do you go? What do you do? And I think for us, the first step that I always walk through is the emotional step of they're reeling. Often.
Well, again, I try to set the stage for the person to come in and feel comfortable. Just talk. Let me know what you're thinking and just talk.
Yeah. And sometimes that's talking about the deceased. We've had clients that come and say, he loved motorcycles. We went on trips together. Right. And now I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think just building that emotional bridge is so useful. Some of our clients, we've known them for years. So we knew the husband, we knew, or the wife, we knew the spouse has passed away. But for many, they're coming at this moment and just saying, I need help. So listening, understanding where they're at, what they need. And I think it's drilling down to the kind of those immediate needs to say, do you know how to pay your mortgage this month?
Who paid the bills when your spouse was alive?
Yeah.
And is that something that you did? And oftentimes, I'll sit down and talk with somebody and I took care of that. I know where the money's at. I know how to pay the bills. I've got things set up. I have, things online. But also we've had people that literally have no way of knowing. They don't know how to write a check. They don't know where the online accounts are, bill pay. They don't know.
The online is, I think, such a different shift as well over the last,
generationally, it's the generationally.
Yeah.
And that's the right way to say that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a shift because it was by checks and you knew what the account name was, you knew where it was. Whereas now, in order to pay a lot of these bills, you have to have the online login. And we'll talk at the end of this kind of episode of what do you do to prepare? Like when you're both still alive, how do you set your spouse up for success? But for like my wife and I, we can both separately and independently log into our bank account and see all the auto pays and the recurring payments. But there's many spouses who one spouse does that. They're the only one that logs in. So in order to pay a bill, they would say, I don't know who pays the utilities. I think my spouse did, but I would need to get their login to get into their side of the account.
Yeah, people feel lost. In some instances, right?
That's right. And so the second part, and this doesn't come out in that first meeting. The first is the immediate dealing through the funerals, dealing through paying the bills, making life insurance claims. All those is what we come alongside them and walk them through that feeling of overwhelm. And honestly, that's where that help is built. Because most people have never filed a life insurance claim. Most people
Social Security benefits.
Yeah, Social Security claims. They getting a retirement account rolled over into their name. All those items, we do that all the time. But for them, it's their first experience with this. So we're able to educate them, empower them, kind of walk through. And that's what financial advisors do in that moment.
Right.
But in the second piece, which is later on, is what now? Like, what does your life look like now that your spouse has passed away, and kind of re-dreaming, I guess, dreaming in a new way. I had a client that her husband passed away, and she still has her husband's motorcycle and some off-road toys and things like that, because she had zero interest in selling those years ago.
Right.
When he passed away, she still goes out to the garage.
There was a sentimental value in knowing that stuff was there, right?
Yeah. And it was things that he cherished. And so she's left that for a number of years of just that space. But now is at a point of revisiting that and saying, I think it's time for me to sell some of these. I think I could.
And that's been years, right?
Years, and appropriately years. I don't think there's any judgment or concern with that. Like, everybody has to go through a grieving process emotionally, but it's also a grieving process, I guess, to say financially, to say, are these assets still the best way to deploy these? We've even had individuals, I say it's more parent generation to child generation. We've had a number of clients that will inherit an account, and they'll keep all the same stocks and things that their parents had invested in.
Right.
And say, well, my parents did this, in honoring them, I want to keep these. And initially, sure, great, keep that. But as we move down the road, we'll realize, well, your parents were in their 80s and they invested as if they were in their 80s. That was appropriate for them.
And economy, I mean, if you think about just the changes in how you shop, I mean, Amazon wasn't around 30 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, Amazon is so prevalent, and all these other ways in which people shop and bring goods to their front door. And your parents may not have invested in any of that. They might have still been investing in Kroger supermarkets, I mean, that kind of stuff.
Which might not be bad, right? But I think it's time to reevaluate. I think that's a part of that process of grieving is the emotional, but it's also kind of the financial grieving and taking control, really, of a surviving spouse, saying not just this was ours,
right,
but rather this is mine now. And my dreams and my goals are to do these things. And the best deployment of my assets and my resources is in different ways. And so I feel like for us, there's the immediate and there's the later. And part of that is developing a new dream, a new spending plan, which secretly is a budget. We kind of stopped using the word budget, but the idea that a spending plan to say, how am I going to utilize these resources?
It's critical to know, first of all, you get a good understanding of what the income is, because like you said, going back and filing like life insurance claims and such as that. But also there's adjustments in income, and Social Security is adjusted. Maybe your pension that you're receiving is adjusted based on your survivor benefits. Those are all things you have to work through to determine, okay, how much income is coming into this household, and then the second, what's the spending?
Yep. And that, I mean, arguably, if they were a couple that ate out a lot, they may not do that anymore. It may be different, or they might eat out more. Say, I've always wanted to go out, and this person never wanted to, but now I can do this.
Right.
It's a whole recasting of what that looks like. And I think for us, it's an interesting moment, especially when it's someone that we've had for years and years as clients. We know the couple, we know the family, we know what they've been about, and then to have one pass away. And there's times where one spouse will say, exactly what we had before, that's exactly what we're doing now. This is the dream. This is where we're headed. Others will say, that was my dream. And to do that with him or with her, but without him or her, I no longer want to travel. I no longer want to do these things. I want to be close to family. I'm moving to Texas where my daughter lives, or I'm moving to, there's all these different shifts. And I think those are appropriate, right? To kind of take over ownership. Our role often in that is to, educate people and help them redream that dream. So I think as people are going through this, of going through being a surviving spouse or having friends that are like, there's always a difficult, how do I help? And I think some of the how do I help is just showing up. Some of it is saying, what resources can I get for them? And we've been brought into a lot of relationships of saying, this is, ex client, and their husband or their wife just passed away.
Right. And
we thought they should meet you. And I mean, that is, talk about a help to a friend.
For sure.
It's walking into that relationship.
For sure. And again, everybody has opinions, no matter what you're going through in your life, and particularly when you lose a spouse, everybody's telling you what they experience and what their circumstances are. And I have to say, everybody's different. Everybody is different. Everybody deals with this differently, and their circumstances are different. I mean, you and your spouse may never have, you don't have any debt. In other words, you got everything paid off, or you may be saddled with some mortgages and some other debt that you didn't realize maybe that you had, or you're not quite sure how to handle that. So those kinds of things.
Well, the surviving spouse in those two situations are very different. One might say, I'm in my mid 40s and a spouse passed away unexpectedly. I've got to deal with the mortgage, the kids, all these things. Where someone else might say, I'm in my 70s, everything's paid off. My life doesn't change a whole lot in the financial picture, but it does emotionally. And those are custom analysis of what makes sense for those folks. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're actually going to talk about before this happens, before there's a surviving spouse, what are some good steps to be taking now to kind of set your partner up for success?
Right.
No one wants to pass away. We're not doing that, but there's that.
But the reality of life occurs, and we need to be prepared for it as best as we can.
Yep. And to know that you can do a lot right now to really set your spouse up for success.
Right.
So come on back. We'll talk through that. Welcome back. We are talking about surviving spouses and how we empower, or any financial advisor would empower someone to really take control of a life that they weren't expecting. Well, what we're talking about in this half of the show is how do you prepare for this before?
Yeah, again, nobody's good in a crisis. I mean, very, very few people are good in a crisis. So what we want to do is be as prepared ahead of time and ask the questions that maybe they're not asking of each other, but we can do that in our setting to be able to prepare the ground for that eventuality, right?
Yeah, right. And to say, what can we do now? What can we do today that is really, I see it, the most loving for our spouse to really set them up for success in the event of something we don't want, they don't want, but how do we set them up for success? So the first one, and we have a list of things we're going to run through, but is a healthy conversation. You have to start the conversation to say, we want to be involved in our finances. We want to be involved in this future. We have some dreams and some goals. And we try and walk people with that anyways, but saying also, if I wasn't here, what do you think you would do? Would you want to move closer to your sister? Would you want to do this? And how
would you keep the house, sell the house? Would you move? I mean, how would you downsize? I mean, what would you do?
Right.
And those are questions that you won't necessarily have an answer to, but it is something that we can talk about, and it's something that you can kind of contemplate.
Yeah.
Between your spouse.
And some of them are obvious. I mean, if you said a man or woman in their mid 40s, and if they lost their spouse, they say, well, what would you do? Well, I want to keep my house. I want to pay it off, so I don't have that as a debt. The kids will still, be close to college age. I'd love for them to still go to college and that not to be derailed. So those two, that's really easy. I want to pay off the house and put the kids through college. Okay, that's step one. Where would you live? Okay, there's all sorts of questions that people don't know yet, but I think there's some that are real low hanging fruit of kind of those dreams. The second piece of part of that conversation isn't just in the future; it's in the current of saying what banks do we use? Where's our investment accounts? What insurances do we hold? And not every household do both couples know that.
Right.
And I think to really talk through, and you mentioned what you and your spouse do.
Yeah, we do an annual, what I refer to as a financial summit. And what we do is we get a balance sheet. I want to know all the accounts. We started investing in iBonds. Well, iBonds for my wife's account versus my account, there's a separate login information. Where is that information held? And what's the balance? And so we get, there's accrued interest inside those bonds. In addition to that, there is life insurance policies. There are disability, or there's Social Security benefits. There's pension benefits we look at. And what happens, and where's that information? Who do you contact?
Yeah.
And what's happened over time is companies have been absorbed. So therefore, you might have been dealing with one insurance company, let's say 10 years ago, but now that company has a different name, may have the same account number. There might have been some changes. That needs to be updated so that you're not rifling through, all this information, or you feel like you're a deer in the headlights. You don't know where to go and what to do, right?
And that's that normal emotional moment. You feel like a deer in the headlights of, my spouse just passed away. We didn't expect this. What do I do? Where is everything? And it's one thing to say, I have to go back to my spouse's emails and dig through, because I know there's an insurance policy in here somewhere, versus, a lot of people use their estate planning binder for this. As part of their estate planning binder, they'll put a sheet that says assets. And the idea is to update it once a year to say, okay, here's a list of all of our assets that we have, either accounts, life insurance, and there's just a list. So at least to be able to open to be like, okay, at least I know this is what we have. The other aspect to that you mentioned, and we'll talk about digital assets a little bit, but access to things. So many couples, one spouse knows the login for whatever it may be. One spouse's email is tied to insurance. And part of that's just the reality of life. That's how things go. But in this kind of conversation, this kind of planning to make sure that both spouses, one, know what exists, that we have an investment account, that we have insurance, but also to actually have some access to or ownership of those accounts. We've had some that one will take the income side, one will take the expense side. I'm going to spend the money, you're going to make the money. That's someone's a family joke.
Can I be on the spend side?
Yeah, right. Can I choose which one I get? But to have both spouses being aware that, we spend money on food and we usually shop at these stores, or we get income from 3 different sources and this is what they are. It is so valuable, to have a spouse that understands where everything is.
So that open conversation is so critical before any kind of event occurs, right?
Yeah, because often it's too late,
and then you need to review it. You need to update it periodically as you go down through time.
And this is something that even personally, I feel convicted in, or kind of inspired to do better. Is there's a number of things that they're in my email. I just do an email search and I find that login or I find that account. I wouldn't even be able to quickly access it. I would have to go and dig for it. Much more my spouse would have to go and dig for it. And we'll talk more about this at the end, but kind of the call to action, we're just looking, we're in August here. And if any of the things we talk about in the next, number of items, if you don't have these in place, January 1st is coming. And that is a great deadline to say, we're going to get this done. Because almost every couple we talk to say, oh yeah. We talked about doing that. We wanted to get a will or a trust set up, or we talked about organizing our insurance papers, or even the simple thing of your house burns down, where's your fire insurance document?
Yeah, where's the insurance at? And again, the more detail, it takes time. And I would say oftentimes we feel like we're herding cats.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, yeah, we'll do it, but then they bring it back. So we have to kind of hold them to account and bring them back to that information. That's part of what our staffing does, right?
And the hard part that it's hard to communicate to a couple that is healthy and growing and building is that we also met with so many clients that we've had for a number of years, and one spouse passes away. And what it looks like for that surviving spouse to have everything organized, to know where all the accounts are. We already have access to and control of and management of their accounts. They have their insurance organized. They've used our vault system where they have all their important documents saved digitally in the cloud. Right. I mean, it is night and day of what their next few months and years look like. And it's hard to communicate to somebody to say, hey, this person we just met is really going to struggle for a few years. This person is going to deal with the emotional loss, but they don't have a financial struggle. They've been involved. They know where things are. So it's hard to convey that to someone, but it's so meaningful to get this done. Some of the other structures, and we'll talk a little bit, is the trust and a will.
The estate planning.
Yeah. My background being an attorney, we knock this out for clients all the time. In fact, today I have a client coming in that should have done this years ago, as they would say. But we're getting it done. We're getting it dealt with. We're getting it in place. So in the event something happens, there's no questions, there's no concern, there's no probate. All those items just are moved off the table as of today. And I think it's such a valuable piece that people don't want to think about or do, or they don't know an attorney. But that's part of my background, attorney being in this firm, is we're taking care of these things for people.
Yeah, it's so convenient. I have to say that with Jeremiah in the firm, when we bring on a client, Jeremiah will look at a trust and he'll review that document. Oftentimes he just makes amendments or changes or whatever, and it's not recreating the entire document. But it's so convenient to have your capability as an attorney to look at those documents and say, these are fine, or no, we probably should make some changes. It hasn't been reviewed in 20 years and we probably need to make some changes to it.
Right. And that's the most common, is we'll see it's been 10 plus years since anyone ever looked at this. And the attorney who drafted it is either no longer practicing or just out of the picture. And just to walk through it with them and say, this is what this says. Is this what you want? And often it's yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. We'll do minor updates for law changes or things like that. Other times they say, that was years ago. That person
that was going to be my successor trustee is now one of my children. That person's moved away, or I no longer have a good relationship with them. I mean, things change.
Yeah, right? Even when they're young kids, they usually have some mechanisms to slow the flow of money down to them because they're younger. But often when things like, my kids are 30s and 40s, they're doing great. Like just give them everything. I don't know why we did that before, but they're doing so well. So there's that. The other is the insurance. We've had some clients who build up on life insurance and say everything's covered no matter what. Others who say we don't need any of that stuff. And it needs to be a conversation one way or the other, whatever your feeling is about insurance. And like we said, the low-hanging fruit could say if one spouse passes away, the other wants to pay off the house, put the kids through college. Well, insurance is the easiest way to deal with solve those, right?
Yeah. So just a comment here is that if you're working for a company, oftentimes you have insurance that's group insurance that's part of your employee benefits. And what we try to do from our client's perspective is get a copy of those employee benefits so that we know what benefits that you have in the event of death. You may have individual policies out here, maybe life insurance or disability or something like that, but there's obviously a lot of benefits that are included in your employee benefit package that you have with a company that you're working for.
Yep, that's right. There's a great place to get insurance. The other one's kind of your beneficiary designations, and that's a big word, beneficiary designation. But basically it's any of your retirement accounts or your life insurance type accounts. If something happens to you, who gets the money?
Right.
And often it would be the surviving spouse is what would be listed. But there's all sorts of things that get listed. There's sometimes we've had accounts where there just was no one listed. And so it's going to flow to the estate.
Or it goes to the trust. And I mean, it gets really complex if it goes into some of these buckets, so to speak, and how the law deals with it. And most people don't, honestly, they just don't understand.
Yeah. And when they got their job 10, 20 years ago, they filled out the paperwork and wrote down a name. And that was it.
I can remember going through a beneficiary designation and update with a client, and he had been married before. And on a life insurance policy, it was his previous wife. And so when we went through it, and I said, I showed in our meeting, gathering all this information, I said, you have this person listed as your primary beneficiary. Well, that was kind of a tense conversation. Obviously, he had forgotten to change it. But we
wasn't on purpose.
We went in and changed it and made it appropriate. So anyway,
and those are things to look at and to do it either by yourself or with someone else. The last is just digital assets. Shared emails, shared photos. My wife has so many great photos on her phone that if she passed away, I don't know how to get to them.
Right.
So getting shared accounts in the cloud, all that stuff is so doable. It just takes some doing.
It takes initiative. Yeah. It's like final expenses. Most people don't think about it, but it takes at least a conversation about it to know what's going to happen if, right? And we're all going to be destined at some point in time. Our life will end, and we want it to have the least amount of chaos and just the negatives of it all. That's a negative event. We don't want to create more negatives, I guess I want to say.
So if you're in the midst of this, or someone that is in the midst of this, that's a way to get them help, right? To get some support. We're happy to step in there. If this is something that's not even on your horizon, man, take some preparation now, to put your spouse in a great position. And January is coming. Do it this year. Do it by the end of 2023. Set a deadline and get some of this stuff done. If you missed any part of this, you can find it on our website, tricordeadvisors.com.
Until next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.